Hey guys, I'm Swishari and I'm making this video to help people gain the most soul value in their games of Deadlock and farm efficiently to win more games, essentially. Some key takeaways from this video that I want people to remember are to prioritize your targets, ebb and flow, and know the advantage in the lane. And I'll dive more into those in a second. These tips are most impactful in the laning phase and early on in the game, but they still can apply later on, and I'll do other videos to focus more on closing out games and making the right decisions as you try to win. So let's talk a little bit about the laning phase. The most important thing in the laning phase is prioritizing your targets. You start out with a pretty limited clip size and long reloads, so you want to make sure you use melees and good advantage to box out your opponent and secure minion souls to gain a super high advantage right away. The most important thing to prioritize is just staying alive in the beginning. Don't get poked too hard and don't dive your opponent if you don't know for a fact that you can win that fight. The second biggest priority is last hitting the minions that are about to die. And primarily you want to be trying to melee them over shooting them with the ranged. I'm sure most of you know this already, but the minion souls are broken up into two parts. There's the initial souls you get from last hitting and the soul that floats away. In the beginning that is 50 souls and 25 souls. So last hitting a minion is worth more than securing the soul in and of itself because it's worth 50 in the beginning and the soul is worth 25. So securing souls is very important, but last hitting the minions is more important. So you want to make sure that you're not missing minions that are dying to the enemy minions as the waves crash together. And you want to make sure that you're not focusing too much on poking your opponent, that you miss out on a bunch of minions and you lose money value, and then you lose fights later on in the game. The third biggest priority is securing those souls. You want to make sure to prioritize your opponent's souls over your own souls, because when you deny an opponent's soul, you steal that 25 souls from your opponent and you get it to yourself. So you want to make sure that you're focusing on their souls and denying them before you focus on your own souls. But if you find that you're losing those soul trades often, just try to secure your own souls and don't focus too much on denying the opponent. The fourth biggest priority in the lane is to poke your opponent. Oftentimes I'll see people dump their mags into the first minion they see and end up reloading and receiving a ton of poke in trade for not much return on their value because they'll miss the last hit on that minion, or they'll miss last hits on other minions while they're reloading, or they'll be too low in order to secure those souls. So poking your opponent can be huge to giving yourself more lane pressure and space in order to secure these souls. So it's really important to poke your opponent as much as you can, especially if you are advantaged. And we'll talk more about that later. And the last part in priority is to seek additional value. Maybe that's a breakable route to the left, maybe that's a breakable route to the right, and trying to maybe get a jungle camp in between different waves. It's all about ebbing and flowing, which is just responding to the waves when they're crashing together and flexing back if you don't feel like poking or diving the opponent will give you any sort of advantage. So the second biggest tip that I talked about is ebbing and flowing. And this comes from the natural movement of waves, and that's what we call minion waves in every MOBA. This applies to every single MOBA, but it's especially important in Deadlock. A lot of times you'll find that you'll shove the lane of minions all the way up into the Guardian or into the Walker of your opposing team in your lane. That puts you at a huge disadvantage for ganks or for losing team fights if one breaks out right there. So oftentimes it's much better for you to ebb backwards and find a breakable route to the left side of the lane or a breakable route to the right side of the lane, or just find a jungle camp and hit the shop in order to kind of give yourself some additional value. And then as the waves come back together or as the lane gets shoved back to your objective, you can flow back into that lane, gain all that value still, and you'll be, another additional 1k souls or 2k souls up on your opponents, and those things will add up over the course of the game. So you always want to watch your lane and respond when you're ebbing back and looking for opportunities to gain value elsewhere. You always want to respond to a crashing wave that's coming into your Guardian or into your Walker. After a Guardian falls, it leaves a lot more room to ebb and flow in the lane because there's more room between the Walkers than there is in the Guardians. So you can shove a number of waves up to the Walker and then ebb backwards, hit jungle camps, hit the shop, find a bunch of breakables, maybe even gank the lane next to you and add additional value to them as well. And then flow back to respond in your own lane when the crashing wave comes back to hit your objective. The third biggest tip for the video is to know the advantage. which is just which team is more likely to win a fight if one breaks out in the lane. More souls is always more power here, but it's important to remember some breakpoints like at 3k souls when every hero gets their ultimate ability. Usually the team in blue or green, for instance, if they hit 3k first, they're always going to look to fight the opposing team to secure that win and press their advantage as soon as possible. It's also important to remember how to play around objectives in terms of advantage. When the opposing team is shoved up against your Guardian or your Walker, you're always at a much bigger advantage because one of your teammates can come gank. Or if you're playing one of those heroes like Lash or Bebop or Paradox, you can maybe switch positions and get them underneath that tower to get the Walker to slam them, get the Guardian to melee them, etc. And that can be a huge swing and advantage for your own favor. But first, let's talk a little bit about playing at a disadvantage. Everyone knows the scenarios where you've lost a few early fights or the opponent has a huge soul lead on you and every trade is negative and you end up at a loss, having to run back to heal or just hide the entire time that you're in your lane. It's important to stay patient here and not trade too much, but look for opportunities for free poke when your opponent is focused on killing the minions or maybe focused on killing your tower. Try and poke them. That poke can add up over time and flip the advantage in your favor. And when you're trying to secure killing the enemy minions, make sure you use cover to your advantage to box out your opponent and try not to get poked too much because you can end up running back to the base to heal far too often and losing value from the lane and the souls that are being killed by the tower. And lastly, when you're playing at a disadvantage is don't pressure the objectives of your opponent too much, even if they're missing from the lane. Sometimes heroes that are at advantage can ebb and flow, and maybe they might be jungling nearby, they might be doing breakable routes, or they might be ganking. And the second that your wave gets pushed up against their tower, their Guardian, or their Walker, they're going to flow back to that wave and respond. And if you're there and they already know that they can kill you in a 1v1, they're going to look to do that immediately. So don't pressure the objective unless you are confident that you can win the 1v1 against them if they come back. Now, the way more fun side of things is when you are playing at an advantage. You always want to press your advantage as much as you can. Be merciless. Do not ease up on your opponents. I have seen so many games lost because of epic comebacks, and Deadlock has some major swings throughout the course of the fight in the way that some heroes scale and some heroes are only performing later in the game. After you get an early kill, a technique that a lot of people don't use is freezing the lane, which is where you let the minions fight each other, and as your opposing minions are killing your minions, you're removing that value from your opponent as they're trying to respawn and come back to the wave. So instead of shoving the lane and killing all the minions right away, try and maybe freeze the lane instead, which is just letting those minions fight each other and only last hitting them to secure that value for yourself while denying as much of it for your opponent. Another great way to press your advantage is just to ebb and flow. As you pressure up against the objective and you find that you're at a disadvantage all of a sudden, flow back, ebb backwards, hit some breakable routes to the left or right, hit the jungle camps, hit the shop, guarantee that value, and then come back when the lane looks like it's more in your favor when you're not shoved up against the objective. You do, of course, still want to pressure your opposing objectives. It's most important to do that when the person who's typically in that lane is either dead or on the opposite side of the map, and you know that they're not going to come back to gank you, but definitely pressure the objectives when you get a free chance and secure that value for your team. But don't pressure the objective if you feel at risk of a gank, if you feel like you're at disadvantage, or if you feel like you're a squishy target. So a lot of times people will look for those opportunities to kill you right away. Speaking of ganking, keep it short and sweet. If you're playing an advantage and you have an advantage in your lane and you want to help another lane next to you, go in, do your combo, try and get the kill, and then get out. Don't stick around to pressure the towers. Don't stick around for a couple waves or in case a team fight breaks out there for a little bit. Get back to your own lane and secure the value of that lane, and don't let your own objectives fall. With these techniques, you'll gain souls faster than your opponents, you'll get bigger, and you'll win more fights. There's more to the mid and late phase in terms of movement and winning games that I'll address in other videos, but remember to ebb and flow through the mid game as well, as you have more room to do so as Guardians go down. Just remember the 3 biggest tips: prioritize your targets, ebb and flow, and know the advantage. Thanks for watching, and good luck in your games.